This video demonstrates how to create a simple Hello World application with EGL Community Edition. To start, close the welcome page and click the new EGL project button on the toolbar. We'll go ahead and give this project a name and click Finish. So an EGL project contains EGL source code. So the first step of creating this Hello World application will be to create a simple user interface. So to do this, click the new Rich UI Handler button on the toolbar. So just like Java, EGL source code is organized into different packages. So let's give it a package, and we'll give our new user interface a name, and we'll click Finish. So you notice that EGLCE will open the new file up in the EGL Rich UI editor. This editor has a design tab for doing WYSIWYG editing. You'll notice that there's a palette on the right that has a collection of widgets that we can use in the application. There's also a source tab which allows us to see the source of our UI. And there's also a preview tab which actually shows a running version of our application. So for this application, what we'll do is we'll create a simple text field which will allow a user to input their name. And then we'll also add a simple button that whenever it's clicked, will actually invoke a service which will return back the user's name with the word hello prepended to it. So you notice that if I click on a widget, its properties show up in the properties view. So for this go button, I'll go ahead and change the text of it to be go, and you'll notice that it's updated in the design view. What I can also do is I can add event handler functions. So for example, when this button is clicked, I can have it call a function. So you notice that whenever we create an event handler function, the EGL editor automatically switches to the source view, and our cursor is positioned in that function. I can now go ahead and write code that should be called whenever that button is clicked. So what we'll do in this case is we'll actually invoke a service that will return back a string. We'll just create a nice dialog for our results to be displayed in. I'll also organize our imports so that the import for this Dojo dialog is picked up. And then what we'll do whenever our button is clicked is we'll actually invoke a service. So we haven't created this service yet, so I'll go ahead and just save this. And I'll right click over here on our source and say new EGL service. So an EGL service part is compiled into either a SOAP or REST service. So just like with our handler, I'll go ahead and pick a package for our service. I'll give it a name. So I could choose to generate this service as a SOAP service or a REST service, but for now I'll just let EGL decide how to generate it. So here's our new service part. You'll notice that it opens it up in the EGL editor. What I'll do now is I'll define a function which will simply say hello based on the name that's passed in. So we've created a service called Hello World Service, and we define a function in it called say hello. So its one parameter will be a string, first name, and it'll return a string. So we've defined a very simple service. Now what we can do is we can go back to our UI, and we can actually invoke that service whenever our button is clicked. So what's going to actually happen at runtime is that this UI code will get generated as JavaScript, and our service code will get generated as Java running on a server. So I'll go ahead and declare an instance of our service, and then use the EGL call statement to actually invoke our say hello method. Because this service is actually going to be running remotely on a server, we use the call statement to call our function, pass it our parameters, and then once those results come back, EGL will automatically call the display results method. So under the covers, this call statement will essentially be compiled into a JavaScript AJAX call. So what we'll do in our display results method is simply display the results to the user. So what we'll do is, within our dialog that we created, we'll just create a simple text field or a text label. Organize our imports to include that import statement, and then we'll just say dialog.showDialog. So what I can do now is I can actually click on the preview tab. EGL will on the fly generate my UI into JavaScript and HTML. And so what I can do now is I can supply a name in to our text field, click go, and what EGL will do under the covers is actually invoke that service. So you'll notice that I didn't have to deploy anything to the server for this to happen. EGL compiled our UI into JavaScript on the fly. It also compiled our service into Java on the fly. And you'll notice now that we can see our results. I can obviously put in another name and we can see what the results look like. So to further demonstrate some of the capabilities of the EGLCE IDE, I can also set breakpoints in either my UI code, so for example right here, as well as my service code. If I then switch back to my preview tab and click the debug button, it'll open up our UI in an external browser, in this case Google Chrome. I can then run my application again, and you'll notice that the IDE hit the breakpoint and now is asking me to switch to the debug perspective. This is the standard debug perspective that's used by Eclipse. You'll notice now that I can look at my code, I can see my variables. I can also step through my code or just go ahead and click play to continue through. You also notice that the debugger is now stopped on my service code because I set a breakpoint on it. Just like with our UI code, I can also debug this code as well. I can see the values of the parameters that got passed in, etc. So I'll go ahead and play through that. And if I flip back to my browser, you'll notice that the results are displayed there. So at this point, we've confirmed that we have a running application. What I can do now is I can actually deploy this to a standard Eclipse dynamic web project, which will allow me then to deploy it to an application server like Tomcat. So if I right-click on my project and select Deploy EGL Project, it'll prompt me to create a new target web project. So I'll go ahead and click the New button, give my new deployment project a name, go ahead and select Tomcat 6 as my target runtime and click Finish. So I have a new web project. I'll go ahead and save my deployment descriptor file, and then I'll click the Deploy button again. So what this is doing now is it's actually compiling my Hello World UI, my Hello World service, and deploying them into this web project. So now I have a standard web project which I can actually run on the server or deploy as a WAR file. Just to demonstrate that this all worked properly, I'll go ahead and right-click on my UI HTML file that got created, select Run As, Run on Server, select my Tomcat 6.0 server, and click Finish. This will actually deploy this project to my local Tomcat server and then open up my HTML page in the browser. I'll go ahead and put in the name just like we did before, click Go, and you'll notice that it works just like it did before. So this HTML file is actually, if I was to look at the source, is actually invoking my service running on the server using Ajax. And so that service is running, returning back the results, and then showing it back to the browser. So hopefully you got a good feel for how EGL Community Edition can be used to build a complex or simple Web 2.0 style application that uses JavaScript on the front end and Java on the back end.